So, no further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our two researchers who will present this year's report, Generative AI, Emerging Habits, Hopes, and Fears. And to take us through the findings, please welcome Chris Carbone and Kara Sundby of Kantar.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you, FOSI. We're very excited to be here today to speak to you all and to share some of what we learned in our recent study. I'm Chris Carbone from Kantar, along with Kara Sundby here. We work in a part of Kantar that's focused on helping businesses explore the future in a structured way. Really no better topic for this year to be looking at than generative AI. We're very excited to be kicking off the conference and to launch this important piece of work. We have three goals for our time with you today. First, we want to orient you to the study. Secondly, we want to share some of the highlights, of course, of what we learned. And thirdly, we want to set a little context and set the stage for the panel discussion, which will be coming after this. So let's get into a little bit of the basics of the study. The study was conducted by Kantar. It was done on behalf of FOSI and generously sponsored by Google. So thank you very much, Google, for that. It looks at how generative AI is perceived by both parents and teens, and it deep dives into their current understanding of generative AI tools, how they use them today as they're starting to gain some familiarity with them, and the perceived benefits that they see in using these tools. It also looks at the risks and concerns that parents and teens associate with generative AI. Obviously, critical topics as we think about ways to foster a safe, positive experience for families as generative AI becomes more prominent in daily digital life. The research included both qualitative and quantitative elements. It was conducted in the US, Germany, and Japan as well, among parents and their teens age 13 to 17, which allows us to make some interesting comparisons between parents and their teens and also across the different markets. So let's get started looking at some of what we learned about awareness and use of generative AI. First, we learned that parents and teens in the US and Germany are fairly equally matched when it comes to their awareness of generative AI today. In the US and Germany, parents just slightly edge out their teens in terms of this awareness. So we see that 74% of parents and 69% of teens in the US, and 69% of parents and 56% of teens in Germany say that they know either a little or a lot about generative AI. The outlier here in this slide and this study in this case is Japan, where reported awareness of generative AI is the lowest across the three markets, and there's also the biggest gap between what parents and their teens say. So 55% of Japanese parents say they know a lot or a little, compared to only 35% of their teens. When we dig a bit deeper into the idea of awareness and knowledge of Gen AI, things get even a bit more interesting. A sizable share of teens in all three markets report that their parents have a better practical understanding of generative AI than the teens do themselves, at least for now. Nearly half of US and Japanese teens believe their parents know more about Gen AI than they do. And in Germany, it's 36% that would say the same. Now, this is interesting and quite different than you might expect on other tech-related topics, where teens typically are more confident, say that they're the savvier ones, that their parents are lagging, and parents typically will agree with that. So we see quite a big difference in the case of this newly emerging technology. Parents and teens within these three countries are also relatively evenly matched when it comes to whether they have ever used or tried generative AI. About 2/3 of parents and teens in the US have tried generative AI, just over half of parents in Germany, and about 3 in 10 in Japan, parents and teens reporting similarly. So differences clearly across the markets, but when it comes to parents and teens' experience within the markets, quite similar. So we've seen on the last couple slides some similarities, again, between parents and teens in terms of awareness, whether they've tried it. But when we look at how people are using generative AI, parents and teens report some differences which are interesting to look at. Currently, parents across all 3 markets report that their top use of generative AI tools are for analytical tasks. And we see that about 3/4 of US and German parents and 2/3 of Japanese parents use genAI or have used it for analytical tasks. Parents are also, interestingly, using it to make themselves more creative, right? So this would include things like using genAI to create poems or images or even music. So we see 2/3 of US and German parents and half of Japanese parents have used it in this way for creativity. In contrast, the most common way for teens to use generative AI currently is for what we would consider efficiency-boosting tasks, such as proofreading or summarizing long texts to make them shorter, easier to comprehend, faster to read. And we heard anecdotally in the qualitative sessions that teens like partnering with AI or kind of working alongside it in this way because they say it not only boosts efficiency, but there's a perceived improvement in the outputs, so improvement in quality of the outputs that they're using it for with their schoolwork. Now, this raises and foreshadows interesting parental concern that we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, which is the fact that parents are concerned that AI will degrade their kids' critical thinking skills. And we'll get back to that in just a moment. One other interesting use case that we really wanted to bring up today, which is quite important, is the use of generative AI for emotional support. This deserves attention because of the social and ethical questions that it raises, and also because, frankly, it's a use case that we already see in our data quite clearly among a sizable minority of people. In the US, about 37% of parents and 30% of teens report that they have used or tried generative AI for emotional support already today. That could be things like asking advice on a personal or a relationship question, getting advice on what to say on a dating app, or even for mental health advice. And when we asked people about their expectations for the future, respondents definitely see themselves using generative AI for emotional support in the future. In fact, you can see about 1/3 of respondents in the US and Germany chose this as one of the top 2 ways that they're most interested in deploying genAI in their lives in the future. And Japanese respondents were even more likely to say this, 42% of parents and 50% of teens. This willingness to use generative AI to explore personal or sensitive topics, it seems to be linked to a perception that these tools offer some degree of impartiality or perhaps in people's minds some sense of anonymity. So whereas we might expect that people would discount AI as an emotional support tool because it lacks human experience or emotional experience, it appears that some people are actually attracted to that fact, right? And they are looking to these tools and find them attractive because they actually aren't human and perceive that this gives them some degree of impartiality or at least less judgment. As one US teen put it, I feel like just because it's not a real person doesn't mean it can't make people feel, because words are powerful. So at the end of the day, it can always help in emotional or mental ways. Clearly, lots more that needs to be unpacked and learned there, a great area for further research. Now let's turn to look at some of parents and teens' hopes and fears for the future of generative AI and how they expect it to impact their lives and society. When we look at parents and teens' top concerns, unsurprisingly, job loss rises to the top for both, likely driven by the media coverage of genAI this past year. The research that we did also uncovers, though, two topics that maybe got a little less media attention, but that do have specific and important relevance for families, and that's cyberbullying and this loss of critical thinking skills that I mentioned before. Teens are acutely aware of the potential of generative AI to be used for more sophisticated means of bullying and to create new and intensified forms of harassment. When you see that teens ranked the spread of false information number 2 and new forms of bullying number 4 on their list of top concerns, it becomes clear that they've already connected the dots. They're aware that the misuse of generative AI has the potential to have real and dire impacts to them in a very personal way. Among parents, we see that the loss of critical thinking skills is number 3 concern, and parents express this in a variety of ways. Some were concerned that their teens would lose the opportunity to craft their own ideas. Others felt that their teens would lose the chance to engage in deep research as part of their education. And I think one of the things that we heard over and over again is that people wanted their teens to have built these foundational skills themselves before turning to technology to help with them. They want their teens to be able to act independently and to navigate an increasingly complex world. And one parent likened it to the use of the calculator for mathematics. He said, once my kid is able to prove to me that he can do it the longhand, the old-fashioned way, sure, I'll let them use a calculator. And he said the same sort of thing around generative AI, wanting to have the proof that his teen could do things on their own, really. So all those concerns came out in our research, but on a whole, parents are balancing these concerns with quite a lot of optimism for generative AI and the benefits that it could provide for themselves and for their teens in daily life. A majority of parents feel positive about their teens using generative AI. The sentiment is most widespread in Germany and the US, followed by Japan. What seems to be driving this optimism is that people expect genAI to provide tangible, personal benefits, and they're excited about this. Life is busy, it's complex, it's hard to keep up, and people are hopeful that generative AI will help address some of these challenges in real ways. Parents and teens share this optimism that genAI will, above all else, help them learn new things. 48% of parents, 66% of teens noted that learning new things through genAI is one of the most exciting potential benefits of the technology moving forward. Parents across all 3 countries also key in on the idea that generative AI can help streamline their lives, right? Things like enhanced and more personalized searches, 45% of parents, and new ways to help support decision-making on complex topics like insurance or financial services. Again, 44% of parents keying in on that. For teens, it's really back to that efficiency story that we mentioned before, with nearly 6 in 10 saying that freeing up time by reducing boring tasks or summarizing and compiling information to make it easier to comprehend, faster to comprehend, these are some of the top 5 most exciting benefits that teens see for generative AI. Finally, one more slide before I hand to Kara. The optimism and excitement that we talked about here is underpinned by an expectation and really an acceptance on the part of parents and teens that genAI is here to stay, that it will become more embedded and more ubiquitous in work, in school, and in their personal lives as well. People are obviously being hit with a lot of different messages and opinions around this technology, so there are, of course, unknowns in their mind, but they're hopeful that the benefits will outweigh the risks, both personally and at the societal level. 2/3 of parents and teens agree that genAI, the use of genAI, will be a vital skill they'll need in the future to thrive at work and at school, versus it being something that is going to fade away, that's kind of a flash in the pan for the moment. And about 6 in 10 see it as something that will supplement their own inherent capabilities and creativity, rather than something that will surpass it or take over the tasks that people do. So there's a sense that people need to work with generative AI to remain competitive, to stay connected with each other, to be successful in the future in work and in school, and that to avoid or to disengage with genAI would mean rejecting certain advantages which people understand may result in themselves or their teens being left behind or falling behind in some way. Summing it up, this desire for positive engagement with generative AI, one of the Japanese teens noted, "I hope it will coexist with humans and that new AI will start to appear in the world and improve human life." Kara, I'll pass to you.
Okay, so we'll now turn to the topic of responsibility. We wanted to hear from families. Who do they think bears the most responsibility for safe genAI experiences? Is it parents, governments, companies? Is it organizations or associations, international bodies or schools, or is it even the teens themselves? Who's responsible? And as it turns out, parents believe that they, above all others, are responsible for ensuring their teens have safe experiences with genAI. And the data here shows that American parents are far and away the ones who feel this way. So nearly half believe that they bear primary responsibility for safeguarding their teens' experiences. This contrasts with about 1/3 of German parents and 1/4 of Japanese parents. Again, they were given 7 options, and it was parents who rose to the top among these markets, but most significantly for Americans. So who shares responsibility? If we know that many parents agree that it is themselves who are primarily responsible, who are the other actors involved? Parents also look to governments. Most notably, we look at Germany and Japan, where 1/4 of parents say that governments bear first responsibility or primary responsibility for ensuring safe genAI experiences. And many parents also think that companies or platforms have to play a key role. So we look at the numbers here, about 1 in 5 in Germany and Japan, about 12% in the US. So some good country differences looking at responsibility here of where people think the primary responsibility lies. And if we stitch together all of these numbers, I think it tells an interesting story of responsibility. Parents are primarily in the driver's seat as the first stop or first responder for online responsibility, genAI responsibility, but they share this responsibility with governments and with companies. And there is some data on the slide here too about teens, and we'll touch on teens just briefly. Teens in Germany and Japan, I think, are the most interesting call out from this piece of the study, which is that they think that the government is primarily responsible for their online safety when it comes to generative AI, more so than their parents. So we've talked about responsibility, and we know that many parents view themselves as the most responsible. But do they have the tools and the knowledge to talk to their teens about how to safely use generative AI? Are they comfortable navigating these conversations? And many of them, as we can see, struggle on this front. American parents are the most confident, but we see some pretty dramatic differences as we look to the other markets. Nearly 3/4 of Japanese parents and nearly half of German parents say they do not have enough information to talk to their children meaningfully about genAI and how to use it safely. They need more education about these tools, and on the next slides, we'll talk about what this means. So we'll start with talking about the trusted sources of information. And we asked families, who are the trusted sources, or where are the trusted sources of education about GenAI? They say that they look to schools and they look to companies and platforms. Those are the trusted sources of education and learning about this technology. And we heard about this qualitatively as well. I think there's a great quote from a German parent here on this slide who sums up a lot of what we've heard and some of what Chris has talked about too in a really nice way. They know they like trying new things but are insecure about where the GenAI journey will lead us. They're already attending a seminar on AI, hoping to use it to take away their fears and show them how to implement it usefully. So they're already engaging in education, they're already working with a school or a seminar, and they're already taking the long-term view that this is a technology that they need to get ahead of and work with their child to do so. And we see here from teens as well that school is the logical place or the preferred place to source their knowledge or their education about GenAI, which is logical because this is where teens already spend a lot of time. So we know that schools and companies are the trusted sources of education, and we get a little bit more nuance when we looked at the findings on this slide, which is, how do families want to receive this knowledge? What are their preferred media or the channels through which they want to learn more about online safety and generative AI? And it's pretty clear that parents want classes. So we have about half of German and American parents wanting virtual or online classes or in-person classes with an edge for the former. And in Japan, there's a preference for in-person classes as well. Teens, not surprisingly, want to receive this information through social media, which makes sense. They spend a lot of time on this platform already. They receive a lot of their education and information through social media, and they gravitate towards wanting those sound bites that formats like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok can offer. So this points to a pretty clear opportunity as we think about how to engage parents and teens in education about generative AI. We can reach them through the channels that they're already using. So we've talked about parents seeing themselves and their governments and companies as primarily responsible for GenAI experiences. We've learned that schools and companies are the trusted sources of this information, and that classes and social media are the preferred channels of this education. But we also learned about a current knowledge deficit that many parents face in talking to their kids about this topic, which raises a final question: what do they want to learn? What are the topics that will help them navigate their conversations and address their concerns about GenAI more broadly? Our research shows that most parents and teens say that transparency of data practices, highlighted on the slide here, is the #1 factor that would help address many of their concerns. This means revealing what's behind generative AI, how data is sourced, and whether it can be trusted is key. Other factors to address, they vary a little bit by market. Americans would prefer more settings to ensure that content is age appropriate. German parents and teens would like to see more courses in school, again, underscoring the importance of educators in this landscape. And Japanese parents and teens want to know more about risks and how to mitigate or control for them. So to conclude our presentation today, our final chapter is one that answers the important question and really the reason for this research from the outset, which is, what can parents and industry do to ensure safer GenAI experiences going forward? And we'll start with parents. So going back to one of the findings that Chris shared earlier, this is a rare moment for parents to lead their tech-savvy teens. It's also likely a fleeting moment. So teens will pull ahead as GenAI becomes more entrenched and embedded in our lives. But today, we're at a pretty unique inflection point. And 3 things that parents can do in this current context include, first and foremost, engaging with GenAI. This means keeping on top of GenAI information and resources as they become available, both for themselves, but also for their teens. This can mean looking at articles, engaging in classes, looking at social media or company and industry perspectives, but really keeping on top of information as it is published. Personal experience also counts here. Parents need to try GenAI tools for themselves and learn alongside their teens and the rest of us as we embrace this technology. And this can be for their own purposes, but also to better understand how their teen can benefit and what risks they might face. Our second recommendation is about creating an open dialogue. So talking to teens is key to understanding how they use all kinds of technology, including GenAI. Staying on top of how their teens are using GenAI today will help ensure that those future experiences are safe. Parents need to take an active and ongoing interest in their teens' digital habits. And this open dialogue will help parents educate their teens about both the risks and benefits that come with using GenAI, and positively role model the process of learning about a new technology, which parents have done before. Parents have learned, by and large, about social media. They came of age having to learn about it. Many will have even had to learn about the internet and email. So this is transmitting their knowledge about learning about a new technology to their teens who are now facing this as their first new technology. Finally, parents can benefit from viewing GenAI as a tool that has the power to level up their skills personally and professionally. Chris talked about this towards the end of his slides. Parents need to help teens learn how to wield the power of generative AI wisely, using it in smart ways to better themselves, to educate themselves without taking over critical thinking and creativity. So finding that balance and helping teens achieve that balance is also critical. For industry, it's important to first reiterate that, as we've covered in today's presentation, people are aware that GenAI is creating a moment of pretty profound cultural change. It's the Sputnik moment, as Stephen said. Companies need to prioritize creating ethical, transparent, and user-friendly approaches when creating these tools. So for industry and for companies, we have 4 suggestions. Companies need to make GenAI solutions accessible and user-friendly for global markets. This means tools should be localized and available in multiple languages. And new tools should be designed with kids in mind to create those equally beneficial and safe experiences for parents and teens alike. Secondly, transparency. We've talked about this already. Transparency is critical. It's what families are looking for to better understand and navigate these conversations with their children. They want to know how GenAI operates, how data is sourced and authenticated, and companies need to help alleviate these concerns, reduce skepticism, and at the same time introduce new GenAI opportunities. So how can they proactively educate and communicate with transparency from the outset? Thirdly, including the perspectives of a diverse set of stakeholders is very important from an industry perspective. This means including not only researchers and government officials, but also academics, nonprofits, app developers, marginalized consumer groups, government partners, and others, trying to create and craft a responsible approach together from the outset. And finally, companies should work with policymakers to prioritize research that will create an evidence base for legislative decisions around GenAI. Potential uses and perceptions of these tools will dramatically change as acceptance grows and we move into the future. And understanding these rapid shifts will be key to guiding the future of safer GenAI experiences. So to wrap things up now, before we go into our panel discussion, we did want to thank you for your time, for your interest in this topic. It's been fascinating for us to learn about GenAI, the human side of it, the parental and the family side of it, and we thank FOSI for bringing us into this research. We thank Google for their partnership. And if you do have any questions on the research, Chris and I will be here this morning. Our colleague, Katie O'Rourke, who's also been a huge center point of this research, is also here. So please grab us. We're happy to answer any questions or have a chat.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt. Pardon me. Oh, it's okay. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I hate to interrupt people's conversations because there was so much to take in there, but really appreciate, but we have to keep moving. Obviously, a huge thank you to our Kantar team for putting that together. This is groundbreaking stuff, and she mentioned the inflection point. I mean, this time next year, who knows what this is going to look like. So really, really pleased and proud to have been able to bring this to you today. Some folks have been asking, yes, the slides are now up on the website. The full report, the executive summary, and the press release, they're all there at FOSI.org. So if you didn't manage to take all your notes, don't worry, it's all there. And shortly, in a few days' time, we'll have videos from not just that session, throughout the conference will be up on our YouTube channel. Obviously, a huge thanks to Google for supporting that work and keeping hands off as to how we developed it with Kantar, so really, really appreciate that. And to my colleague, Emily Mulder, who oversaw the whole project. So well done, Emily.